In this video I'm going to show how I use line pattern to do borders. This is the quilt I'm using, and it's just one that's going to go to one of the shelters. It does not have a straight border at the top here, it dips down and goes up. So you see how good line pattern is at dealing with that kind of border. So what I'm going to do is touch, design, sew, quilt, start new, line pattern. No, I'm not. Let's go back. What I have to do first is add a block. So I went back, add block, because I want to show IQ the top border block. So I'm going to mark on quilt. And I'm going to, even though this border does not have miters in the corner here, that's how I'm going to trace the block with a miter, because that will help me when I'm setting a pattern in the corner. So I'm going to lower my needle. I'm just going to trace this inner seam line between the border and this sashing. Okay, and every time I feel the seam line deviates from the horizontal, I'm going to touch OK to give it another point, so that on the screen I get the same wobbly border as on the quilt. I'm going to go all the way along. Now here at the other corner, now I'm going to go to the diagonal, to the outside corner. I'm not going to put the needle right over the raw edge. I'm imagining that this person is going to put a 1/4 inch binding on, so I'm going to show the edge of the border as actually being a 1/4 inch in from the raw edge. Now I'm coming back along the raw edge. Normally I would mount this so it was absolutely straight, this top edge, but I didn't do it. Okay, and I've just got that one diagonal to do, so I'm touching closed block. And there's my top border. Now I'm also going to show IQ a little bit down each side. Again, it's to help me when I set corner designs. So I've finished my block. I want to add another block. I want to mark on quilt, and I'm going over here. And I'm looking at my piecing, which is little squares and then a big piece, and I'm going to use that as my guide as to where I define the block. I want the end of the block to be opposite a seam line. I can't make it all the way down here, so I'm going to choose this one. So okay, up to the corner, across the diagonal again, and then down the side. And I'm going to go over to the other side and do exactly the same thing. Finished, add a block, mark on quilt. Okay. Now I like to mark the block on the quilt rather than use line pattern to mark the outside of the block, because I know there's no risk of me telling IQ to stitch out this block. It will never stitch it out. So I'm finished. There's my border, as much across the top and down each side as far as I can go. So I'm finished. Now I want to add a pattern, add pattern, line pattern. And I'm going to choose a pattern to put in that border. So this will take me to my catalogues, and I'm just going to choose geometric, just a very simple loop. Here it is. Okay, now I'm going to start over at the left hand side. So I'm moving my machine over here, and I'm going to go up the side, across the top, and down the other side as far as I can. And as far as the repeat size, I'm going to use my piecing as a guide, and that makes sure that the border pattern relates to the piecing really well. And even though these squares are not equal in size, the border will look good. So I'm going to start here, and I'm putting my needle over the seam line, and I'm touching OK. And I'm going to make the loop one square. There it is on the screen. Now I can see here's the edge of the border. I need to make this pattern larger. The pattern height says it's 2 inches. I'm going to make it larger, so I'm touching pattern height, and I can either just drag it with my stylus, or I can tap, 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 whichever. That looks pretty good. So that looks good, and it's in the border. It's looking good. So I'm going to touch OK. And now I'm going to move my machine up to the next seam line. There's the next repeat. Touch OK. Now I'm going to the corner. OK. Now I'm going to come along this side. That little bit of sashing isn't the same size as the squares in this quilt, but I don't think it's too noticeable to make that loop smaller than these loops. So OK. Okay, and I'm following the seam line, so when that goes uphill or downhill, my pattern will follow along and it'll fit in the border very nicely. Now sometimes the border piece will actually narrow slightly if somebody isn't very careful, and you can change the height of individual loops. As long as it's still red, you can edit it. So I'm going to just show you how to do that. I'm just going to tap it down. You see it getting smaller. I can put it back up, just so that it looks good in that in the border there. That's okay. Going on to the next one, and the next one, and so on. I'd go on all the way around. Now I'm just going to touch finished. I'm not going to do it. There's actually a big old gap here where there is no quilting. Let me zoom in. Add edit pattern, modify pattern, yeah. Okay, continue, I want to zoom in. There's a big space there where there isn't any pattern, so I could add a little motif in there, or if I wanted to, I could put a loop in there and then join it onto the split the pattern here and join the loop in so that it made a nice corner. So that's the simplest way to use line pattern in a border. Note this loop had its start and its end point at the lowest point of the pattern, so I just traced along the seam line, and the pattern will touch right on the seam line all the way along. So that's one way to use line pattern for a border.